and not mingle. In the room, we have 5 people. We have Thomas, Doris, Carol, Molly, and Matt, and myself and my husband. We ask everybody in the chat, everybody in the room, to be respectful and kind. This is a community place, and we're doing this as a community service. So the hour is yours to do as you wish. I'll monitor the questions on the chat, and any question that somebody asks in the room or that I ask you, you could repeat it so that everybody can hear it. That would be really good.
Sure, I'll do my best. Okay. Well, first, let me thank you and Victor and Alan Brooks for opening this forum to the community. To me, it's a great opportunity to get together and answer some questions and talk in a bit more depth about my responses and your questions and how we might come to the best outcomes moving forward. I'm Salim. I'm running for re-election to Mercer Island City Council, position 2. I joined the council in 2017. Before joining the council, I was on the 42-member stakeholder committee, which worked through about a year-long exercise revisioning town center. So we worked on mid-block connections, daylight planes, setbacks, retail mixes, heights within town center, and how basically to update the old town center visioning exercise to create a more vibrant downtown. Ultimately, our work was remanded to a joint planning and design commission, which then made recommendations to the council, which they enacted prior to my joining. While serving on the Mercer Island City Council, I've served on a number of regional boards and commissions. I worked on King County Flood Board, King County Growth Management Planning Council, and also the Salmon Recovery Council, VIRA 8. I've also worked within a number of Mercer Island boards and commissions, the Library Board, the Arts Council I've been on since almost the beginning, Sustainability Committee. I'm one of the founding members of the Finance Committee, which drafted the first ever financial guidance for the procedures for the city, which will help future councils build out and plan biennial budgets. And I've worked on a number of ad hoc committees. For instance, I just got done with 20+ hours of interviews on RFP responses for the town center parking study, which is going to get kicked off early next year. So that's a little bit about my service. I want to make sure we get to questions, so I'm happy to take the first question.
So I have the first question from online, and I'll try to alternate online. Salim will manage the people in the room.
And Salim, can you just make sure I repeat the
question? Even these questions.
Yeah, they can hear you better than they can hear me. So Meg Lippert wants to know, what is your position on overnight camping in our public parkland?
What is my position on overnight camping in our public parkland? So one of the things that differentiates me from my opponent is I have a voting record. My voting record on public safety is very, very strong. When I look at public safety, I don't look just at policing. I look at police, I look at fire, EMT, medical services, and YFF. My voting record on this is a strong support for the no camping ordinance that expanded the existing no camping ordinance that we've had for decades that just covered parks to include the rest of the city spaces. So that meant city rights of way, city property, library property, schools, all of the rest of the public spaces in Mercer Island. And I felt strongly about this because what we were seeing was an increase in people experiencing homelessness, migrating to those spaces and trying to live a life. The life that we saw them living was maybe exemplified best by driving across the bridge and seeing the state that Seattle had become. And it was unconscionable that we could continue to let that happen to folks that really are surrounded by services but have a hard time connecting to them. So the impetus of 21CO2 was, of course, expand the no camping ordinance that we've had for 2 decades in the parks to include the public spaces. But moreover, it was to create connections with shelters on the east side that had the wraparound services, the drug addiction services, the social services, the connected services to get people IDs, to get people back on track with their lives, to the folks experiencing homelessness. We wanted Mercer Island to be a place that if you were experiencing homelessness, we weren't forgetting about you. Beyond that, we've since created additional leverage relationships with the East Side shelters to have their social service workers expand their service basins to include Mercer Island. So we have the Congregation for the Homeless, a men's shelter that has a social worker who has expanded their service basin to include Mercer Island. And then we also have a female shelter. That allows our police officers, when they're identifying folks that may be in need, to instead of roll up in uniform and instead of approaching somebody that might be defensive about a law enforcement officer, to call a social worker that can come out and really talk to them about what are they experiencing, what services might they need, and how could we connect them to those services, which are really in abundance in our region, but difficult for people that are experiencing homelessness to get to.
So I have a chat, so
Okay.
people in the room.
Any questions from the room?
One question. So I understand that one of the really contentious aspects of that ordinance, the actual modification of an existing ordinance, was that now the police are capable of asking somebody to leave or forcing them to leave without some sort of 48-hour citation. They can be told, you can stay here for 48 hours, but after that you have to leave. As is, I guess, the law in Seattle. Our provision doesn't allow it. Ours is the police can get you a social worker, and you either accept the social worker or they can basically boot you off the island. Is that correct? Or
So the question is, how might our 21 CO2 ordinance implementation differ from any ordinance that exists in Seattle? Seattle has a similar and has had a similar no camping ordinance for a long time. Their fines are much steeper. Their penalties in terms of jail time are much longer. It is really much more punitive in our view. 21 CO2, as it was passed in Mercer Island, is designed to, as quickly as possible, connect people to services, which means establishing short-term domiciles in parks for 48 hours, and then having staff reaching out to them, having to tag tents, having to track 48 hours, and then having people move, shuffling around, is not a future for people experiencing homelessness that we thought was productive. We did not include any components like that, nor would I include any components like that, because the reality is on Mercer Island, the number of people experiencing homelessness is reasonably small. It is a problem that we can deal with compassion, with empathy, with services, and by making connections. This is not the type of thing that a typical community member can do, because these are complicated circumstances that affect homelessness, but we feel confident that we're finding the right services to wrap around the people on Mercer Island that are experiencing these issues so that we can get them the help they need. And that goes beyond just finding a pathway out of homelessness, because we have relationships with ARCH, which is a regional coalition for housing, which is made up of a number of member cities, East Side member cities, where we're building and creating affordable housing units all the way down from 0 county median income up to 60–70% county median income. And we have those affordable units on Mercer Island. We also have a Mercer Island Youth and Family Services Housing Assistance Fund. And the Housing Assistance Fund is available to islanders that are experiencing challenges paying their rent. And all throughout the pandemic, we made the extra effort to fund that well beyond its prior funding levels, to keep people in their homes, to keep them safe, and to keep people from entering homelessness during a pandemic. And we continue to do that today. And we continue to track the ending of the rent moratorium and how that might affect people on Mercer Island, and how can we find ways to keep them in their home, which also carries over to the ending of the moratorium on utility bills and utility payments that might be in arrears. How can we find ways to get people back on track rather than be punitive? Any other questions from the room? One of the things I really want to talk about is I want to talk about town center. And I know that Victor here is one of our planning commissioners, and I know he will engage me on this topic. But Mercer Islanders know when they drive around Mercer Island's town center that it could be better, that there's a lot of potential, and they've seen a lot of things that have happened that I think that they like. When they see a business like Pagliacci, which is a single-story infill type redevelopment that is in a parking lot next to a park, they say to themselves, why can't we have more of that? And when they see a development go in, such as Aviara, the Legacy, the Hadley, any of the post 2005 developments that have occurred along 27, they wonder to themselves, why do we lose so much retail? You know, with every new development, we're losing 14 to 30% of the retail square footage when the building becomes a multifamily, you know, 3/1, 4/1 type development. One of the things that the council has been working on for the last year, and something I'm super proud of, and something that I'm super excited about, and I think Island residents are really going to appreciate, is how can we create zoning that protects restaurant and retail in town center and expands it for the future growth of population that we know is happening. And we're always growing. What we've remanded to the planning commission, so what is before the planning commission, but has already been proposed by the Merced City Council, is to take all of the parcels in town center and ascribe a floor area ratio of restaurant and retail that is to the total lot size. So if you have a 100,000 square foot parcel of land and you want to redevelop it, and it's subject to the FAR ratio, meaning it hasn't already redeveloped, we're going to require that a quarter of that parcel be small restaurant and retail. We've asked the planning commission to put thought into what should be within that ratio, that 0.25%, 0.2623 ratio. But to juxtapose that with what are we seeing in current redevelopment, we see 0.1112 restaurant, retail, and personal services inside redevelopment. So it's 135% increase in the amount of restaurant and retail the Islanders are used to seeing every time something redevelops. We know that the property values in town center have climbed steadily. We know that there's a number of properties that are poised to redevelop. We see one right now that's vested. The permits are vested with the city of Mercer Island, which is the Sheen Law Development, which will take away the King property that is on 78th and 29th, and Mud Bay, which is kind of catty corner on the other side of that parcel, fronting 77. That redevelopment alone, which is not subject to this FAR because it's vested before this new code is going into place, is losing fully 1/3 of its retail square footage, which is sad to see, but has been a strong motivator for the city council to develop ways that are unique within our region, which are groundbreaking. There's no other municipality that has figured out this kind of formulaic approach to building, retaining and building a retail base in the town center. And so we're pretty excited about the possibility of having that code come out of the planning commission with their inputs, their improvements, and instituted this year. And that would lift the moratorium, the building moratorium that's on the south end of the town center, and hopefully get us back to business. The one thing that I will say that really tags along with that is that you can't have zoning be the only lever to try and get something done. You have to find incentives. And what we're talking about in our parking study is a comprehensive evaluation of all of the parking in and around town center. How are commuters parking? How are people that live in multifamily parking? Are they parking their cars in their buildings? Are they parking on the streets because the streets have no permits and the buildings charge residents for parking on site? Where are the employees parking? How are people interfacing with the active retail that they really like? Tablet Square, the strip along barrels, some of the really active retail spaces. And so we're doing a study to figure out where are all these people parking, what is their preference for parking, talking to the business owners, talking to the employees, and talking to the general public. But the thing that comes up over and over again is how do you make a town center walkable, activated, approachable, enjoyable? And the one thing that we keep looking at are the cars and the volumes of cars that are screaming along 27 and around the bend at Starbucks that's on the west side of 27. And so we have to start thinking about the town center as being a place you go, not a place you drive through. We need to think about lowering the speeds in which people travel through town center to lower the noise. We need to think about curb parking wherever it is possible. But how do you make that curb work best for the town center, for the merchants, for the shoppers, for the employees? We're dealing with a technical revolution in terms of self-driving cars, food delivery services, the way people are getting things. We need more curb space that is dedicated to picking things up and dropping things off, or quickly pulling in and quickly pulling out, or deliveries. We need curb that incentivize retail in a way that our curb currently doesn't do that. We have a massive opportunity along 77th and 80th, which are two very wide streets, which encourages cars to drive at speeds that are generally too high. We have a lot of opportunity to create very inexpensive parking, and then tag that along with a parking management plan that really optimizes that for business activation. We've created the technology with ALPR on our police cars. This was technology that I supported that will allow parking enforcement, parking demand, pretty advanced parking protocols to go into place so that we have a parking protocol that is turning over and working for the community. But the reality is, if we can create a parking program that works for town center, that activates the curb, what we can do is start to provide that incentive to infill development like Pagliacci's. And we could say, for example, to the next 9 or 10 restaurants or retail, small restaurants, small retail infill. If you will build 1-story infill retail development or restaurant, let's say 1,000 or 2,000 square foot max, we will relieve you of your on-site parking requirement. And we will put that parking requirement into the city's right of way. And that would include the additional parking spaces that we create on 77th and the additional parking spaces that we create on 80th. If we can do that, we can start to blend incentives with zoning code to start getting the mix of businesses that people want and expect to see. Right now, we kind of say, it's up to you. Whatever you can park on your property is what you can develop. And unfortunately, we have potentially really active parcels of property. There's a small triangle-shaped piece of property outside the Starbucks drive-thru on 27. It can't be a restaurant, it can't be retail, it can't be anything other than a small office because it has 3 parking spaces. You could take a space like that and really activate it if you get creative with incentivizing and moving some of that parking requirement off-site. Other thing that we can do is we can make sure people are aware of the parking opportunities that do exist. A lot of parking underneath parking structures for the multifamily mixed-use building. Some of them allow walk-off parking, some of them don't. But having a common way, a common understanding of signage on how to identify those opportunities so people can find them. Not everybody wants to park underground, and I get that. I want to create a lot of on-street parking opportunity, and I want it to be very approachable for people that want to do business and dine and enjoy their town center. I'm sure questions come out.
I got one for sure. You're a council. We have a city manager. Who's looking into this?
The question is, I'm a council member. We have a city manager who's looking into this. The council proposed a moratorium, almost 18 months ago. And they did that because a prior council, it said that the south end of town center, everything south of 29, didn't need to have any retail requirement. That if you wanted to build multifamily, 3-story, 4-story, the ground floor requirement for retail did not need to exist. We felt very strongly that the data that the prior council received to make that decision, to inform that decision, was wrong. And so we wanted to study that issue again. So by putting the moratorium on, we stopped development, redevelopment that would have included multi-story, any single story or as by right development could occur. We exempted the farmer's frontage that is on the west side of 77. And personally, I know there was some contention about that issue, but I did it because farmers was proposing 48 homeowner occupied townhouses, high-end townhouses. And the town center is mostly apartments. We have, I think, 2 buildings that have condos in the town center. And one of the things that I feel strongly about is creating a mix of housing, especially for islanders that are empty nesters that want to move to the town center because they like the idea of being close to services and retail, but don't have something that they can buy and they would like to buy something. So I supported exempting that, but the rest of the south end of town center was subject to the moratorium. This allowed us the time to study from an economics perspective, how much economic activity is derived from the town center. And we use Department of Revenue data that was pre-pandemic, pandemic, and now maybe we call it post-pandemic, we hope, to look at spending in just restaurant, retail, and small personal services that are the types of businesses that we here Islanders want more of. What we were able to do is find all of the square footage, identify it using CoStar, again, using a consultant to do this analysis, and match the revenues to the commercial square footage and the vacancy rates to calculate how much retail and restaurant the town center could support. And the answer is it can support all of it. It can support all of it and then some. And then the then some is another 30,000 square feet. That's roughly what, 10 island books more as we grow through 2044 based on our population targets. So we've taken a very methodical approach to understanding what is the retail base, the restaurant base in town center. I know that there can be more precise ways, more perfection to the methodology. But we chose a methodology that is going to outlast this council. We use CoStar data, we use Department of Revenue data. These are data sources that are going to be around 20 years from now. And anybody that looks at what we can do, what we did or what we're doing, will be able to update it with the same data sources to have an apples to apples comparison. And so really, that's a long way of saying I'm a pretty data-driven kind of guy. I like the data to tell me where to go. I like listening to our residents. I want to know what they want, what they expect. And when you can put those two together and come up with zoning solutions, parking incentives, comprehensive approaches to building a town center that people want and need, I think that that's the outcome that's best for Highland. That's what I'm working towards. Daryl.
Thank you. Parking is a great concern. My condo building was built in 1975. The requirement was 2 dedicated parking spots per unit. Plus we have 8 guests. Someone may be unfortunate. The unfortunate, this is task force. The unfortunate decision was made. We said something like 1 or 1.5 living unit, whether it's apartment or condo. And it did not say that the dedicated parking spots had to be free. So this really exacerbated the parking problem. Many of the newer buildings meeting that minimum requirement and charging residents for parking, something like 150 or more for parking space. So that's why we're all taking up the city streets. Is there a possibility of doing that decision, at least to the point of compelling the building owners to provide at least 1 parking spot per resident without charge?
Sure. All right. So let me repeat the question. So the question is that in an existing condo building in town center, I presume, is it in town center boundary?
If right behind it.
Okay, so that's a town center condo building that had a parking ratio of, let's say, 2 to 1 in the parking units plus guest spots. Over time, started to see the unintended shift of parking offsite because the condo association started charging for parking, or people felt that parking on the street was maybe more convenient or advantageous. The question is there something that we can do to push that back? So in our town center, the multifamily building requirements have different capacities for retail parking, resident parking, different types of retail, mixed restaurant parking. They all have different ratios. One of the concerns that we've had is, are the ratios right? And are they being enforced? Are the people in the building where the parking spots have been created using them? And the unintended consequence is that many of the parking structures in the multifamily buildings have started charging monthly $150 a month parking fees. And so there is no disincentive for a person to park on the street. There's ample street parking. There's no permit required, 24 hours a day. And that's generally what you see with frosty windshields in the morning when you drive through town center. It's a car that's been parked overnight, typically belongs to a resident. There are a lot of strategies that we can use to change them. We can look at you could look at techniques like street sweeping. California does this all the time. They run the street sweepers through town center every morning at 5 a.m. Your car's there, it gets ticketed and towed. You can charge for parking. You can charge for overnight parking. And in fact, if you charge for overnight parking, all you need to do to fix this problem is charge a little bit more than the buildings that are charging. So if you want to park overnight in the city streets in the town center, it might cost you $175 a month. Your building will ultimately be cheaper. And the idea is that we want to put the cars back where they belong. If we granted a permit for a building to be 5-story tall and have 200 parking spots to support its residential units, the expectation that the residents had when that occurred is that those units would be parking in those spots, not parking in city streets and rights. So I'm confident that the parking study that we're working on right now will develop policies and strategies that we will codify that will fix that problem. And I'm certain that we could do it. The reality, though, is that there may be ways to do that in partnership with the building owners. There may be a trade-off that ends up being a win-win. It might be that some of the buildings that don't allow walk-off parking, but are charging and have significant underground parking, it might be in an area of town center that we want to see more retail parking for adjacent uses, that we could enter a partnership and find a way to sell that that is a win-win. But I do believe people should park in the building that they live.
Thank you.
Question, board? Oh, didn't see you back there, Mr. Hall.
Like what you said tonight, Steve, 2 questions. One is on the restaurants, you mentioned 1,000, 2,000 square feet. I believe the new development across the street here is talking about 1,000 square feet, which is really a hot dog stand. It's not much more. So I think I can get closer to 2,000 or above, because you take a good sized kitchen and bathrooms, kitchen, you don't have much area for people to congregate.
Yeah, so the question is, in terms of providing off-site parking incentive to incentivize infill restaurant and retail, I had made a suggestion that 1,000, 2,000 square foot type infill development, that we could do about 10 of those. I'm calibrating that answer to how many parking spaces I think that we can fit in the city rights of way. We can't relieve somebody of an on-site parking requirement without creating the parking somewhere.
Well,
But I don't want to have 2 new restaurants eat up all of the parking incentive that we create. But it's a good point. It might be that we could create 5 new restaurants that are infill development and relieve them of the on-site parking requirement. I think those are details that will work out as we develop a parking study, as we identify how many on-street right-of-way parking spots that we can create, how we would prioritize those in terms of 4-hour parking, 8-hour parking, 6-hour parking, commuter parking. But
my
it's
second question was some of the newer developments didn't happen, like at Tully's. They were proposing 0.75 parking units for residents. That was shared with Micah and Sound Transit. Your data guy, I can't even see how that is even feasibly possible. And as we get new developments in town center, parking for those developments is critical. They're providing that in that development. Is my
Okay, so the question is, we've seen a range of proposals for development in our town center. One of the thorniest issues that always comes up is the ratio of parking stalls to residential units and also retail that's going to be in the building. And we've seen everything from 0.75 parking stalls per residential unit to maybe 1.6. One of the things that has snuck into the implementation of our parking code prior to my joining the council has been this concept of shared parking. May not even be codified that way, but shared parking is effectively saying that a parking stall for a resident may share uses with as a parking stall for, let's say, a business or a restaurant during the day when the resident is likely to be at work. And that when the resident comes home, that stall would then be available for a resident. I think that the pandemic has taught us a lot of things. And one of the things is that we don't know what people's travel patterns are. We don't know what people's work patterns are. We have no guarantee people are going to drive a car to a place at work or stay at home and work or create a new business that is completely virtual. Maybe they have a car, maybe they don't. I think what we need to settle on is that we are a region that is going to have light rail. There will be opportunities to use the light rail to do things, but they won't allow someone to do all the things that they want to do. It won't go to Costco. It's not going to go to the hardware store. It's certainly not going to do a big shopping trip and bring it back to your house. There's going to be a need for parking. And so having the appropriate number of actual physical parking stalls to physical housing units is pretty critical. I think that the thing that will drive that home is when we do the parking study, and when we talk to retailers in town center about what do they need, where their employees park. Once we figure out Mercer Island residents and their commuter parking challenges and solutions, we're going to find that the demand for our city right away parking in town center is at capacity. It is not going to be able to carry the multifamily vehicles that are currently, dominating our city streets. So we'll solve that problem, I think, in a way that will be constructive. But I do think that we will look at the code going forward to make sure that we're constructing enough parking stalls per residential unit so that we're not exacerbating.
Change the subject just a little bit. So, at your council meeting before COVID, you had a number of people who would express their desires or their wants or wishes, or someone that was running for council said that they would object to that because this rambles on. What is your opinion on having people come and testify?
Okay, so the question is, at Mercer Island City Council meetings, in person or virtual, we have public comment. And right now you need to register to make a public comment so that we can get to you a Zoom link to log in. Prior to COVID, all you had to do is show up in council chambers. There was a sign-up sheet. You could use it or not, it really didn't matter. But you had 3 minutes to say what was on your mind. Most people talked about an issue that was before the council at that meeting or around those times. The question is, there is another candidate for city council that thinks maybe this is not an efficient use of time, not adding sufficient value, and maybe should be done away with. I take the opposite approach on that. I really enjoy public comment. It's an opportunity to hear directly from the public, their unfiltered views on any topic. It doesn't have to be a topic that's before the council. It informs the discussion when it's done right. I've been in so many council meetings where somebody has come up and given public testimony, and there is a legislative action that is underway that has paused to consider those public comments and sometimes even change course. I'll talk a little bit about that. I have supported, in fact, having a town hall because I feel like the 3-minute comment period is nice, and you have people that appear before the council frequently, and they're very polished and professional in their deliberations. There's also a lot of people who would like to get together in an event like this, but not relative to an election cycle, just to talk to their council, just to ask some questions, just to get some responses. And I would fully support having, we have a lot of meetings. There's no reason we can't allocate a couple meetings to town hall, where we have the full council available to have a dialogue with the community. You want to tag along on that?
I'm trying on the subject. You finish.
So I'm not sure who made that comment. I wouldn't support that at all. I get a lot of value out of 3-minute comments, and I hope they keep coming.
At some council meetings, and especially at the community input, meetings or the forums or the community invited, we have, unfortunately, I've been looking forward to hearing about all sides of the issue. Instead, what I got was a particular group or this particular group, depending on the subject, having all 32 members of the group get up and say almost the very same words. And it took up our time and found away from valid arguments on valid views otherwise. So they dominated the conversation. I think that's what I object to, and perhaps some whoever made it was talking rather than expressing community input. I was on the board of the farmers market, and there was an issue coming from the board, both coming from the board, that was near the parts. And we were told, could you please just have one representative of the group present the case instead of having 7 or 8 people get up and make the same plea. And that's fine. Now, the group I'm talking about in that one case was SOS. And it was really irritating. The same words over and over and over. And is there a way you can somehow control the number of members of the same group presenting the same words?
Okay. I wanted to hear that question and make sure we were still talking about council meetings, and I think we are. So the clarification is, there have been some council meetings that have been so well attended by people wanting to give public testimony, and that much of that testimony has been repetitive, maybe even scripted the same, delivered from people having the same group affiliation, people asking for exactly the same thing. And is there a way to be more efficient or to deliver that message as strongly, but in a different way, with respect to the time of the council? Personally, I think we need to respect the time of the public for coming out and doing that. This was a time where people had to leave their homes, leave their families, leave the dinner table, leave their kids, to sit in a room with 100 to 200 people and wait their turn to speak their 3 minutes. And I don't want to personally get into the sausage making of who should aggregate 10, 20, 30 people's message into a single 3 minute and hope that it is amplified in a way that I hear it loud and clear and my 6 colleagues we hear it loud and clear. I know it seems inefficient, but there are other inefficient things that we do too. And this is the least of my worries. It happens so infrequently. It's happened maybe since I've been on the council a couple times. Residential design standards. When you get into something that touches the 90% of the island where 100% of the soul is, that can spark a lot of emotion. And I think it's incumbent on us to listen to that because everybody brings a little bit different story to that. Going back to public comment and how public comment can change legislative action. We had an example of that pre-pandemic when we were doing the critical areas in the shoreline master program. And we had a public comment from a gentleman who said that he was having a ridiculous time trying to improve salmon habitat with his dock. And he read to us what the provisions within the code were for redecking a dock. And one of the advantages of redecking a dock using today's best available science is that you can put semi-light transmitting material as the decking, which takes away the area where predators for small baby salmon live, which increases the likelihood that salmon coming out of the Cedar River, growing up in Lake Washington, will make it out to the ocean to then return and breed. It was those comments that sparked a conversation within the council to hire an expert to look at that code, which we eventually revised. And what we learned in that revision is that the code was so punitive, so out of touch with reality, so unpalatable to dock owners that docks weren't getting fixed. And they weren't getting fixed. They were just getting repaired, boards here and there, maybe putting epoxy on things that were rotting. People were cobbling them together because there was no good pathway forward to work with the city and to work with the Army Corps of Engineers to create a dock that they wanted to use that was safe, that also protected the salmon habitat. We changed it. It took us a year of working through the science, working with the Army Corps of Engineers, updating the Shoreline Master Program, working with consultants that we hired to navigate that process. And ultimately, the science said this would be a non-significant change. There would be no harm to doing it. But what it did do is it incentivized people to then go about repairing their docks. And now we're seeing a groundswell of docks that were previously creating habitat for predators for salmon, the mouth of the Cedar River, getting refurbished, getting the salmon decking, taking away those predatory habitats, and that is going to be helpful to commercial around. Same is true for incentives with pocket beaches. You know, if anybody has a bulkhead or boulders, a concrete wall that abuts the lake, they have to realize that that is ruining salmon habitat. I understand it's serving a function, but there are other ways to serve the same or similar function with pocket beaches and shoreline restorations to respect the ecosystem around us. And I've worked a lot with salmon recovery. I've worked a lot on Lake Sammamish and the Cedar River watershed. And we need to do more to preserve those salmon runs because they're getting pretty desperately low. When I was a kid and I grew up here, you could almost walk across the fishing boats that lined up at the mouth of the Cedar River when the Chinook salmon run hit. It was incredible to see. And they were massive, massive runs. Now we count the fish and we're able to actually count seemingly all the fish, which is depressing in its own right. So a lot comes from public comment, not always what you intended it to come, but some significant benefit can come from that, particularly in the legislative process.
Democracy is ugly. It's tough.
Yeah. Process can be a messy affair. Any other questions? Yours?
Your management style, is there a book or a person, professor, or someone that you have taken as how you use your management style to work with other people?
So the question is there something that's guided my management style, my ability to work with people and how I work with people? Now, I know because I've watched one or two of these events that I'm going to be asked about my favorite book. So we're going to jump the gun and we're going to get to that right now. I have a favorite book. It's a business book and it's called Good to Great. And it's within a series of books that are really about improving business systems and looking at a business in a systematic way. And any business is really built on its people. And having good people doing good things is really critically important to a business. What I always do is I evaluate my staff, the people that are in my company, and I figure out, are they in the right place for the skills that they have? And then how do you get that person from good to great? And oftentimes it's how are you leading, how are you managing, and what are the systems that you're putting in place to make people really effective? And one of the things that I do is I hold multiple level 10 meetings in my company every week, where I have all of my operations team together. And what we do is we break the ice. We talk about something good that happened personally, something that good that happened professionally. We have a scorecard. It's a It's a very succinct scorecard of metrics about the business, things that we measure every week. We can see change, and they tell us if things are going right or going wrong. We talk about headlines with our clients, with our industry, are things changing? And then we talk about to-dos. Everybody has to-do items. Everybody has rocks, 90-day rocks, things that they're working on a quarter basis to achieve big, hairy goals. And then we address issues for 90 minutes and only 90 minutes. We take them one at a time, we talk about them, and we solve them. We move on. And if we're done, we're done. We hold this meeting every week. It's always at the same time. It's always with the same people, and it's always the same length. If we don't get finished, we deal with it at the next thing. One of the things that I've learned is that when you work with people, you got to give them purpose. You got to give them vision. You have to give them leadership. And creating the tools to be able to do that is really what makes a business successful. And I've tried to do that in my business life. I bring it to my government work. I try and find the right sequencing, the right level of information, and when the time comes to make a decision.
I have a question in the chat. Nancy wants to know, what would you like to see happen? Sorry. What would you like to see happen with the Tully's property?
What would I like to see happen with the Tully's property? Let me tell you a bit of background about the Tully's property. The city of Mercer Island bought the Tully's property a number of years ago to create commuter parking. And we're using the Sound Transit Settlement Funds. So there's a pool of $10 million that Sound Transit has paid to Mercer Island as mitigation for the transit interchange and the loss of the center lanes to I-90. So we want to create Mercer Island resident commuter parking at Tully site. We had gone down the path of trying to do that within a mixed-use development. The mixed-use partner that we chose didn't work out. And so we're going to go a different direction. We're targeting ST2 coming online in 2023. So we want to bring on as many parking stalls as possible prior to operations. What that is likely going to mean is low scale, low impact street parking, meter parking for Mercer Island residents that is in and around the cul-de-sac and the Tully's property. What I proposed, and the council supported 7-0, was to convert the Tully's building into a remote town center Mercer Island police precinct. And that would begin operation next year, staffed by volunteers. What that does is it creates a hub and a spoke place for Mercer Island Police Department to centralize their equipment, their patrol cars, their bicycles, and some of their other equipment right around the transit hub and right around the town center businesses. One of the things that we've seen in the town center is a significant increase in crime, and crime that I think is pretty troubling. A lot of car prowls, smash and grabs, burglaries. We've had some violent burglaries in the not too recent past. And those things concern me, and I want to have a police presence in town center so people know, first of all, where to go, and that our police have a place to hub out of. So short term, those are the goals. Long term, I think there's going to be a lot of possibilities on how we could develop that site into something that would be a really big asset for the community. That's where I think we want. Mr. Racy.
So I just had a little bit of a follow-up to that question. So earlier when we talked about town center, we talked about walkability in the town center. You talked about the police station, you talked about police cars, and then you also mentioned bikes. I'm wondering if there's a possibility to also have school patrols, because you talked about walkability included with our police patrols.
Right. So the question is, in terms of community policing, especially in our town center, that I had mentioned bicycle patrols, car patrols, but might we see more foot patrols? I think we're going to see all of that. My experience with MIPD is that you have to give them the tools to allow them to engage in those ways. And one of the challenges, just to be honest about bikes, is that if they want to deploy a bike, they have to put a bike rack on a car, they have to put the bike on the car, and that happens at the existing precinct, the city hall, and they have to cart it to town center, wherever they're going to do a bike patrol, and then do their bike patrol, and then return that equipment to city hall. If we can hub some bikes at the town center precinct where they can pull up in a car and jump on a bike, and there's no overhead of messing with racks and walks, they're gonna be much more inclined to do that. Likewise, I think if they're hubbed out of town center, we're likely to see more foot patrols. And I would certainly hope that the chief would do more, incentivize more foot patrols. As a council, we don't generally get into that level of policing. I think we can send a strong message in terms of, are we supportive of our police? Are we giving them the tools they need? Are we creating diversity within the police force, the diversity that the community expects? In my time in the council, we have added Black officers, Hispanic officers, Asian officers, female officers. Within the fire department, we've added our first female firefighter. These are the things that I hear that the community wants to see. And I hear that the community wants to now interact with these people in our public safety department. And I fully expect, and I'm sure that they want to patrol town center out front. I don't doubt that. Mr. Hall.
Just a thought, one of the things that we brought up a lot of times over the town transit, there's no bathrooms. Facilities that people go. I think you could double that, totally says a bathroom too.
Okay, so the question is, Sound Transit and their implementation of our light rail station and the bus intercept that is covered in the settlement agreement has no public bathrooms. Could we increase the Tully's building envelope to include some public bathrooms? Of course we could. Of course, that is something that we could do. Is that the best thing to do in that location? Is it the right thing to do in that location? I don't know. I know that there are a lot of strategies that we could use to direct people to bathrooms that might drive other outcomes like business. You know, there's nothing like going to a restaurant to use a bathroom and then dying or get a cup of coffee. If we can do things to create the right type of restaurant infill, retail infill around the train station, which is going to see a lot of activity. You know, Sound Transit is talking about bringing in 14,000 passengers a day and dumping them on the north side of North Commercial Way to cross North Commercial Way to enter the train station, and then do that all in reverse at the end of the day and throughout the day. They're also proposing that buses park along North Commercial Way on both sides of North Commercial Way, so the south side and the north side, waiting for indefinite periods of time, 24 hours a day. And this is all when we have a settlement agreement that we negotiated, the Sound Transit signed, that said they would have all the loading and unloading operations on the south side, but they would only have 15-minute bus layovers, and the bus layovers would only be on the south side. Why did we do that? Why did we negotiate for that? We did it because North Commercial Way, now that Island Crest Way, SOV, HOV access to westbound I-90 is no longer available to single occupancy vehicles, North Commercial Way has become the main thoroughfare for people to get westbound onto I-90. So you're going to have 20 buses an hour going through that, many buses stationed on both sides, 14,000 pedestrian crossings. And now all of the volume of surrounding cars that used to take that exit, I think it's around 2,300 per hour, now passing through North Commercial Way to get down to the I-90 westbound runway. So it's an area of significant concern. It's an area that I have been staunch in my support for the litigation against Sound Transit that uphold the agreement that they signed, which again is operations on the south side, layovers on the south side, and 15-minute layovers. It is not Mercer Island's responsibility to become a bus barn for Sound Transit when they could do that at the opposite end of the run. It's just that they've chosen to disregard that aspect of the settlement agreement. You have a question?
Totally issue. We had the emergency ordinance to rezone the park area there, so we could build a building. That's all. Can we have the park back?
So the question is about a previous emergency rezone of an area of the Aubrey Davis linear park that was done in a way to facilitate development that is no longer going to happen. Can we have the park back? You can have the park back.
Thank you.
What I expect to see in that site, if there is substantial redevelopment, would be significant underground redevelopment. We have acquired enough parcels from WASDOT right away to maximize the underground parking opportunities so that they're very efficient and we get a large number of Mershon commuter vehicles down there. The other advantage of doing that is that it's a dirty site. It was polluted years ago by BP Arco. We have obtained a settlement with BP Arco to pay for all of the cleanup on that site and adjacent sites. We have other coverage that will carry any of the expenses beyond them. So we're going to be able to do a positive ecological benefit to Mercer Island when that comes to redevelopment. I think the community really needs to come together and think about what do they want to see on the ground side, the above ground side of that redevelopment. I'd love to see retail restaurants proximate to the Sound Transit Station. I've talked about, if the city could create retail spaces that had affordable rents. We do affordable housing units for people that have fixed incomes. Are we creating any affordable retail spaces for businesses that we know and we love that really can't afford to move into the latest and greatest building that also comes with the latest and greatest rent?
Pardon me, following up on this, but the visioning, that was what originally started in town center. Kind of went awry. Everybody seems to agree that it didn't really work out. We didn't get what we paid for. But so much of what you're talking about right now seems to lack the cohesive vision. It's a lot of great ideas. But this doesn't seem to be, we don't have a champion in the city that says, building, this is the vision, this is where we're going.
I get it. So the question is, we have a vision for town center. The vision is memorialized in zoning code and development regulations and architectural standards. We don't see what we want to love about our town center happening. We don't see a concerted effort to try and get there. Is that a problem with the vision? And I don't think it's a problem with the vision. The vision right now is going to prescribe that buildings redeveloping a town center set back as they get taller, that they have more building modulation, so they look more interesting and less, Eastern Bloc. The canyons will no longer grow. The sidewalks will have bigger and deeper setbacks. You'll have more street frontage retail and restaurant. You're going to have mid-block connections that can also have retail opportunities within them. You're going to get a lot more interesting town center. The parking that I talked about is going to put jet fuel on top of that. How do you accelerate and build a town center that is more vibrant to parking through a parking management program and incentives? We can do all that. I've supported ALPR and the police patrol cars because we had a court case that said that using chalk to mark people's cars for how hours parked was a violation of their constitutional rights. So we effectively had no way to enforce town center parking. We now have a technology answer to that that could easily bring back an enforceable parking program that is legal and effective. It's something that our police department can do. What we are lacking is leadership to take town center to the next level. I do as much as one council member can do. I think that as a community, we need to find that leadership community. I know we have some really strong voices in town center, retailers, people working with retailers that have strong hopes and visions for what we can do. I think once they see what we're doing with the floor area ratio for retail, restaurant, and some personal services being required, what we're doing with parking studies, moving the cars that are parking overnight from the multifamily buildings back into their buildings, and really activating business through parking, creating incentives to build infill development businesses, creating restaurants and retail without having to have an on-site parking requirement. I think we will hit critical mass. There will be people in this business community that won't be able to ignore that, and they will say they want to be part of that leadership circle of how do we really kick this thing into high gear. And that's when I think you'll see the speeds come down on 27th. I think you could even see stoplights be removed. I think you could even see parallel parking along 27th. I think you could even see the Big Bend in front of Starbucks disappear and turn into a quiet gathering space, an area where people could eat outside, some benches, some tables, some additional on-street parking opportunities. But certainly, we don't need to have that arterial relationship within our town center. We can have that outside of our town center.
We got 6, we've done an hour. Does anyone else have any questions?
So, you may have heard us talking earlier, there was a fire up in Southern today. And the fire department has come up in a number of these sessions. Overtime, funding of the fire department, all that. I was wondering if you could give us your thoughts on it. And help educate us both on the issues as well as what are some of the solutions.
Yeah. So the question has come up about Mercer Island Fire Department. There's been a lot of discussion in the community about the cost, the growth of cost, the overtime that goes into the fire and EMT services. So can I speak to that? I can. Let me first start by saying everybody wants a local response from the fire department. Everybody wants to be able to pick up a phone, dial 911, talk to a local firefighter or local fire response person, and know that they're going to receive a timely medical or fire response that comes from Mercer Island. That means the South End Station or the North End Station. Everybody expects that. I had an experience when I was a new father back in 2015. My son was 4 months old. This was the first time that I was at home alone with a 4-month-old, and I'm a first-time dad. My wife left to go out with friends, and lo and behold, an hour after into this adventure, our son Elliott starts crying. And he starts crying louder and louder and uncontrollably, and then crying to the point where he seemingly stops breathing. And I tried calling everybody, my mother-in-law, my wife, nobody could get home, nobody, but this kid kept crying. This was super unsettling to me. And I called 911, and they were there within minutes. Unfortunately for me, and I was running for city council this time, right before they walked in the door, his diaper filled to 110% capacity, crying stopped. I had a giant mess. I was so embarrassed. But I was happy to see them. I was happy to see the firefighters. They checked everything out, walked around, said have a good night. But that is the experience that Islanders expect, and that's the experience that I in the next term would absolutely deliver. In terms of how do we deliver fire services now and moving forward, I understand there was a fire on the south end of the island today. I'm sure when you were there, I didn't go myself. You saw Mercer Island firefighting companies. You probably saw Bothell, maybe Linwood, Redmond, Eastside Fire. We in the Mercer Island area and surround have mutual aid agreements with all of the other fire departments. When there's a fire on Mercer Island, our single fire company can't necessarily put it out. And the call goes out to our mutual aid partners to dispatch units to Mercer Island. And that's what you see in these coordinated fire responses. It really is a regional response to firefighting. And I don't know why we look at Mercer Island in a way that is absent of the regionalism that is necessary to be effective at firefighting. We want to have a good complement of the South End and North End Mercer Island Fire Department, but we have economies of scale that we can leverage with the region that is around us. Training, for example, we have 30 firefighters, but we train 30 firefighters. Bellevue will train, hundreds of firefighters. Inside firefighters will train hundreds of firefighters. A lot of these people could be consolidating training, HR, legal, some of the functions that are non-core among the larger pool of firefighting resources, EMT resources. There are other challenges. We used to have ladder trucks on Mercer Island, and we used to have those because we could man them with volunteer firefighters. We have lost all of our volunteer firefighters because the unions have grown, the professionalism within the firefighting profession has grown, training is increased. It's hard to staff up volunteers to the levels that our insurance really requires. But then again, we are not providing opportunities to Mercer Island firefighters to staff a ladder truck or to staff a different piece of equipment that we don't have on Mercer Island and we can't afford. So how can we look at Mercer Island firefighters and create a legacy that respects them, that provides career pathing, career development, and work-life balance in terms of providing the opportunity for overtime, but not demanding that so much of it come from so few. How can we do that in a way that makes a bit more sense? And I'm open to those conversations. I'm sure that the fire union, who's decided to roll over their union agreement, which should have been bargained this year, to be bargained next year. I hope that if I'm reelected, that they will be open to those conversations. I think we can make it a win-win. I don't think that we have to do anything that would threaten Russian firefighters being on Russian.
Question.
So if you watch these, you know that the final question is always comes from me, and the question is, what is your spirit animal? And if you don't like the term spirit animal, what is an animal that inspired you?
Yeah, well, there was one that I was going to use, but I think it might have already been used, so I'm going to use a different one. My son Elliott got a book from Island Books. It's the Elliott Daughter, and it's all about Elliott Daughter in Elliott Bay and how he goes about looking at all the different functions of Elliott Bay and trying to understand them. And so Elliott Daughter has been read a billion times in our house. I read it this morning, so I'm going to go with Elliott Daughter.
Very nice. Okay, on that note, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you everyone online. We appreciate it.
And so anybody that's interested in learning more can visit votenice.com. My contact information is there. You can email me, you can call me. Open to any questions if you want to get together and have coffee. Please vote for re-election. Salim is city council position 2.
Thank you.
Thanks.